since Old Home Week just passed, it's kind of unofficially the end of summer on PEI. So I hope everyone's managing to enjoy few last nice days before school starts up for the fall.
Yes, we're going to rotate into that fall schedule where it always feels like the beginning of a new year.
Absolutely.
All right, and we've got, as I said, a very special guest today. Catherine, would you like to just introduce yourself and say hi to everybody?
Hi, it's Catherine Latimer, and I'm the Executive Director of the John Howard Society of Canada. Very happy to be joining you on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you very much for participating and jumping on with us. We're really glad you could make it.
Yeah, very happy to have you here. We were supposed to have Catherine on the island right now to join us for the Atlantic Executive Directors meeting. Things come up and she was unable to do so, but we're very glad to have you here, Catherine.
Yeah, it's great to be here, and I'm sorry I missed the trip to PEI. I love it there.
Yes, no, definitely the next best thing. So why don't we start there, Connor? I'll leave it to you to kind of take off with the Atlantic ED meeting that's going on right now, and anything else you want to share from a board level.
Sure. So the executive directors of the Atlantic John Howard, so PEI, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Newfoundland, have a working group within the greater network of John Howard societies, and we collaborate on projects on a regional basis so that we're able to get contracts and things like that from John Howard and do things on this regional basis. The executive directors meet regularly, and this is our first time hosting it here on PEI, so we're very glad to have everyone here. Happy to be doing that to discuss what's going on in the region, how we can collaborate in the region, and to show off I think the great work that we're doing here on Prince Edward Island. So we'll be having a little reception with the executive directors later. I'll be heading down to, and I'm looking very forward to seeing everyone. So that's something big that's going on right now. From the board level, just to update the listeners on some of what we have discussed in previous podcasts, we continue to inch closer to the launching of our Veterans Homelessness Program. We have a caseworker hired for that specific role now, and we're just waiting to collaborate with the federal government on the official launch. So keep an eye out for that. We're very excited to be launching that program. Josh, I know you'll talk a little bit about this as well, but we hosted another tax clinic. Yes. Just for anyone who hasn't heard about this yet, we have volunteer CPAs with CRA who come out with us into the community where we host meetings with our clientele, houseless individuals, other people who maybe can't afford to get their taxes done or just aren't sure of the process or don't know how to do it. And free of charge, we assist them with filing tax returns, which is a fantastic thing. It helps, it can help people get benefits that they didn't know they were entitled to. And in some cases, pretty substantial amounts of benefits. This is a program that's done nationwide with CRA, but we might be the only John Howard that's assisting with it. I'm not sure on that. But I know we recently received a certificate of appreciation from CRA. Wow. Regarding, our help with this. I know we've helped over 400 unique individuals through this program, and the number across Canada is over 7,000. So, doing this is certainly making a lot of positive changes in a lot of people's lives. So we've recently hosted another one of those free tax clinics. We are gearing up. We're getting ready. Catherine, maybe you can talk about this a little bit. We've got the John Howard Society of Canada, AGM, coming up in Calgary in October. So we'll be appearing. We'll have a presence from PEI there, and very excited for that. We are still maintaining all the programs that we've been running all along. Some possible expansions coming along. There's some talks with the government right now, with the provincial government, about us potentially providing services similar to what we provide at Richmond House here in Charlottetown for a housing unit in Kings County.
Mhm.
That I don't want to say too much about that because it's still in kind of very early preliminary discussion stage, but I think that would be a great thing for us to be able to do.
Yeah.
And it would help us to establish, more of a permanent foothold in Kings County. We have offices in Charlottetown. We have a satellite office in Summerside for Prince County. Now we need to establish something more of a permanent foothold in Kings County. We've got the point in time count coming up soon. And Josh, I know you can talk a little bit more about that, but speaking of Kings County, this is the first time that point in time count is going to include Kings County, which is a good thing.
Very exciting.
Very exciting. Say it's a good thing. It's going to highlight the extent of the houselessness issue in Kings County and help us, again, the better, more accurate and more complete data we have, the better we're able to provide services to those who need them. Helps us to know where to target services, who to target them to, and where that targeting needs to be done. So getting that accurate and complete data is going to be a fantastic thing. Keith, our executive director, and I have also been in some, again, preliminary discussions with a private sector partner based out of New Brunswick on some projects we can collaborate here on PEI. Things like transitional or post-custody housing and things of that nature. Again, we're at a very early stage in those discussions, but those are a couple of things that are on the horizon from a board level and things that I'm personally very excited about.
Yeah, I mean, that's quite the list of updates considering, like you said, we're in the dead August here, right?
Yeah.
So, the work never stops, right?
No, it never does, and I wouldn't have it any other way.
I think we could go through a few of those items in a little more detail. Sure. Catherine, as our guest on the call, I wonder if you want to speak a little bit more about the AGM in Calgary that Conor referenced there.
Sure. I think we're all looking forward to going out to Calgary. There's a few things on the agenda that are, I think, of particular interest. We generally have sort of a day of conference before we have our AGM, and we're hoping to conclude a statement of diversity, inclusion, and equity that we have been working on. So we've got a facilitator who's coming, who's going to take us through that in the hopes of having something for the John Howard Society of Canada that resonates well. And another thing that I'm keen on that Conor has been working on with me is the terms of reference for the subcommittee for litigation. Litigation is an important tool for the job that the John Howard Society of Canada is tasked with, which includes making submissions and arguments and pursuing just, effective, and humane criminal justice and corrections systems at the federal level. And litigation is an important tool, but it's one that we don't use lightly. It's not a secure tool necessarily, and there's often some financial and reputational risks with going to court over certain things, but it is something that we hope to nail down so that we can move ahead in a most effective manner. And then we have a number of speakers from the Alberta area who are going to speak to us about a variety of issues, including their drug courts and a few other things which are of interest to people.
Absolutely, yeah. No, and as you say, Catherine, we've been working on these terms of reference for this litigation subcommittee, and I know you're approached quite often about John Howard Society, either leading the charge on litigation or on joining and on existing litigation. So, and I believe there's some ongoing litigation at the Supreme Court of Canada level currently.
Yeah, John Howard Society of Saskatchewan is bringing a due process issue with respect to disciplinary segregation, and it's going up to the Supreme Court. So we had discussed whether John Howard Society of Canada should be intervening in support of that. So that would be a good one. In order to protect the rights. We just actually had the Supreme Court pronounce on a lawsuit that we were participating in, which had to do with the retroactive application of the Criminal Records Act which was subsequently overturned by the courts. But a person who got caught in that middle before it was overturned lost his job and was suing Parliament for damages for passing laws that were unconstitutional.
Wow.
Now, I thought that was a bit of a long shot, but in fact, we won that.
Wow.
So it was a real, well, we were just interveners. We weren't carrying necessarily the main banner on it, but it really does raise the question about Parliament's obligation to take seriously the rights of individuals and the charter rights when they're passing legislation, which I think is going to help us in the long run.
I do too, and sometimes when you see these types of challenges, Catherine, you often wonder, like, what kind of advice are parliamentarians getting regarding the potential constitutional implications of laws that they're passing?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, a really big one for us is Bill C-83. I mean, it has been a policy priority for John Howard's to do what we can to curb abuse of solitary confinement or administrative segregation. So John Howard challenged the Corrections and Conditional Release Act provisions around administrative segregation years ago, and we won the case in BC. And there was a similar case in Ontario that found that the administrative segregation violated charter rights. And rather than appealing that to the Supreme Court, went up to the courts of appeal in both of those two jurisdictions, the federal government decided to repeal the provisions and bring forward new legislation called Bill C-83 to create something called structured intervention units that were to replace these administrative segregation units. And our research is indicating that the charter deficiencies identified by the earlier courts associated with administrative segregation are persisting in these new structured intervention units. And somewhere along the line, the Department of Justice certified that this new legislation would be charter compliant.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem to have happened yet. And I know something that you're involved in is lobbying Parliament to finally have a review of this bill,
Yes.
intervention units, which was supposed to happen quite a while ago.
Yes, I think we're about 18 months past when the review was supposed to start, and they were supposed to come forward within a year with a report on any needed amendments. So it's really taking its time. Which is most unfortunate. So I think we're going to continue our efforts to try and get that underway in the fall.
Yeah. And then aside from like just kind of the more sort of straight ahead, like straightforward or kind of traditional litigation that John Howard's involved in, Catherine, I know we've also recently had standing at a couple of coroner's inquests as well, right?
Yes, we did. Yeah. In fact, we're looking at another one. I guess the preparatory meeting is tomorrow to think about whether or not we want to apply for standing. But it has to do with prisoners in remand who there was a coroner's inquest about, 2018, looking at 8 prisoners who had died in this institution, this one particular facility, of overdose deaths. And then they did the coroner's inquest, they made some recommendations, and this new one has to do with another 7 prisoners who died of overdose deaths in the same institution. So the question is, were the recommendations of the previous coroner's inquest actually implemented by which is very similar to the one that we did participate in, which was the Terry Baker inquest, which involved a woman who died in the same segregation cell as Ashley Smith about 8 years after Ashley Smith did. And there was a coroner's inquest and recommendations that had been made, and they had not really been implemented. So there's a real issue, I think, of accountability for doing what can be done to prevent deaths in custody.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I mean, and that's just a couple of the ways that John Howard Canada gets involved, sort of in the litigation process in kind of a number of different ways. So, yeah, to have this subcommittee up to assist you in deciding what to pursue and what not to pursue, and whatever other support the board can provide you in pursuing that litigation. It's something, again, to say we're looking very forward to getting on the go.
Yeah, as am I. I think it'd be great. It'd be really helpful.
Yeah. All this talk about kind of federal institutions reminded me of another board update. So here in PEI, we don't have a federal institution, although we do have accused persons who are sentenced to federal time, and they travel off island to the different institutions. There are 3 male federal and 1 female federal institution in Atlantic Canada. But historically, John Howard PEI, our work has largely just focused on the provincial correctional center that we have here. But I know we've recently been in contact with the acting head of community and correctional services for the Atlantic region. And we're going to start to establish a presence in the federal institutions. I know we've recently been invited to go up to Renous, the maximum security federal institution in New Brunswick, to attend a seminar or something that they've got going on there. But we're going to be, trying to establish a presence and assist, federal inmates who from Prince Edward Island, kind of in whatever way we can, especially with sort of returning and reintegrating into PEI. So that's also a very exciting development. That we're in the early stages of, but I'm hoping that it will spread from Renous to the other institutions as well.
Yeah, and I think it's important to have that continuity for folks who are, local to PEI, and just because they go off island, particularly when they're looking to return, you want to maintain that connection and help with that transition and reintegration.
Absolutely. I know something else that we're working on, and Catherine, I know you can speak a little bit more to this, though, is on the federal framework to reduce recidivism.
Yes.
The 5 pillars that undergird that framework. And one of them, if I'm not mistaken, is, positive community supports and things of that nature.
Absolutely. Yeah.
If we can help to provide that for returning inmates, then all the better.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the other 4 are very important too: housing, education, employment, and health, for returning, health support for returning prisoners.
Yeah, certainly those all contribute to the wellness and functioning of the individuals, particularly the population that we interact with.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I like that we've been able to start to incorporate some of the things from the broader perspective. I think we'll go down that path a little more in a minute here. I just want to sort of hammer out the other couple of things locally that Conor touched on, and then we can turn it back over to you, if that's all right, Catherine, to talk more nationally. So tax clinic wise, the first 2 tax clinics we've had have been hosted out of the community outreach center, knowing that that's sort of a hot spot for the individuals that might need that financial assistance and that guidance and support in accessing some of those resources. And both of those were very successful. And so what was interesting and unique about this last one is that we actually hosted it at the John Howard Society, at our Queen Street office. And so we had 7 individuals come, which was good to see. And we received some feedback from CRA that they were happy with the turnout. And they thought that was another successful event.
Great.
And are interested in scheduling another one here. So it looks like that's going to continue to occur. It'll be interesting to see sort of how that evolves and the frequency, of those clinics, or how long they continue to do them.
Yeah.
As we continue to kind of support the individuals in the community that might be missing certain financial pieces.
Yeah. Josh, how does the word get out to, sort of our clientele or people who may be, could use this service? How does the word get out to them? Say, hey, this clinic's being hosted.
Yeah, so I think that's a good point around the marketing aspect of it. We've used some of our reach in terms of our social media, our website, and spreading it internally amongst many of the clients we support. And I do know, certainly when they were being hosted at the COC, they also, extended the information to anyone who they were in contact with. But it could be, as we continue to have this partnership, something that we take a look at in terms of how do we get that information more widely available to folks.
Sure, because like say, I know we've helped over 400 people so far. I'm sure there's a lot more that could use it. So
Yeah, and as you say, like that, those 400 people primarily came from our volunteer tax clinic that we do, from sort of, it's a targeted during tax season, and then it occurs the rest of the year sporadically as people need it.
Yeah.
So I think people have become fairly familiar with that.
Yeah.
But there's certain things that can't happen necessarily during those tax clinics at certain times, depending on who's available. And so having these targeted clinics, they can do everything, right? Because there's an actual CRA representative on the site. So I think that's a good point around expanding the messaging around. It's not just this tax clinic that we kind of blitz during tax season, and then happens now. We've actually got this secondary resource where there's a CRA representative there in person. And I know, like we touched on previously, getting through to them on the phone is a nightmare.
It is. It's difficult for somebody who's got a phone and a place to sit for 30 minutes to go through all the menu options, right? But for somebody who's houseless, doesn't have regular access to a phone, doesn't really have a place of their own to go, it's next to impossible. So bringing CRA to the people is a much better way to do it.
Yeah, and I think that's such a valuable asset to have. And as you're alluding to, it'd be nice to make sure that people are aware of that.
Yeah.
So they're not missing the boat on people who could greatly benefit from that.
For sure.
Yeah. The other thing you touched on, so you touched a bit on the Kings County, and I think that's an interesting follow-up to the workshop that we did there in May, which we were both a part of, and I talked about sort of the success we had there. Yeah. So it's nice to see the need and how that all kind of ties together with the upcoming point in time count, with the workshop, and now with potentially an opportunity to have some housing units there, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, there was a study done recently on the sort of on houselessness in specifically in Kings County, right, which is available and can be found on the provincial government website.
Right.
But it had a number of recommendations, and I'm happy to see that it looks like government is taking those recommendations seriously and starting to implement some of them. So that's very positive to see, and we're always here and happy to assist government and partner with government on any of those recommendations or anything else that we can do. So
yeah, it's great to see that we might be able to play a part in that.
Yeah,
and
for
help
sure.
with some of those recommendations.
Yeah.
The last thing I'll touch on before we turn it back over to Catherine was you mentioned the point in time count. So that's quickly approaching here. October is going to be just around the corner before we know it. So we've continued to do information and training sessions, and we continue to kind of iron out the kinks as to how that goes. But one of the things that I think is worth highlighting, as you sort of mentioned, we're expanding to Kings County. And what that allows us to actually say is that we include now a representative from West Prince too, is that for the first time ever, the pit count will be island-wide.
Yeah.
And I think that's so critical. Anywhere you would want to go provincially wide if you could, but certainly here, given our population size is a lot smaller and things are happening on a smaller scale, I think we really need to capitalize on that.
Absolutely. I mean, in the past, the point in time count was confined to basically to Charlottetown and maybe Summerside.
Yeah.
Right. And I think houselessness is probably not more prevalent, but maybe more easy to see in urban centers. That's where you'll actually see people like actually on the street, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist in rural areas. Right. And PEI being primarily rural, I think it's important that we get that picture as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's definitely existing. It just looks different.
Exactly.
It's a little more hidden, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it'll be nice to get that information. And again, update our database. We have our homelessness dashboard on the website. And, one of the drawbacks has been that we know it's not as accurate as it could be.
Yep.
And this will help us push forward to a place where we can feel a little more confident about that.
Agreed.
Right. Catherine, feel free to comment on anything we might have brought up. And then I think it's just interesting to turn it over to the national perspective, because folks on PEI, see a lot of the work we do, and a bulk of it is housing related. And I don't know that they necessarily realize that that's a bit unusual, and that there are a number of things associated with, whether it be criminal justice or litigation or some of the other sectors or aspects that John Howard does across Canada. So I think it'd be interesting to kind of fill in the gaps for folks who maybe don't have that understanding.
Sure. Well, I think PEI's role in housing is quite unique amongst John Howard's. I mean, you are designated as the provider, or you've got a specific role vis-a-vis homelessness and housing, right?
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, we're the designated community entity for the federal government's Reaching Home program on Prince Edward Island. So yeah, that does give us a more prominent role in housing than I think probably many other John Howards across Canada.
Yeah, certainly. John Howards generally are very concerned about prisoners being released into homelessness. And I thought I saw an article. Did I not see you comment on an article in the paper, Conor, about the percentage of PEI prisoners who are being released to no fixed address?
That's right. We did have. I did do an interview with the paper about that, based on some data that we had collected, or that our staff had collected just during work. And yeah, so it's basically, Catherine, about 2/3 of inmates at our provincial correctional center get released into houselessness.
Yeah, that's this is not a good thing for supporting successful reintegration, eh? I mean, it creates a sort of a chaotic lifestyle. Many of the prisoners that I have spoken to are leaving federal institutions, do not want to go to homeless shelters, right? Because the proliferation or the availability of drugs is pretty high. The whole culture is very different at a homeless shelter than it is in a prison, and it's just not a place where they want to be. And they've got very few options coming out of prison when they're released into homelessness, and it shouldn't happen. So that's definitely a priority for the John Howard Society of Canada, and luckily it is one of the priorities of the federal government's framework to reduce recidivism. So housing is in there, right? And there is, I mean, one of the jobs of the John Howard Society of Canada is to try and figure out if there are priorities and pockets of funding from the federal government that could be used by the local or provincial John Howards to achieve, shared objectives for why the federal money is available, and objectives of the particular John Howard Society to achieve what they feel is needed to be achieved. And hopefully we'll see some movement on the whole housing front in terms of resources. I did have an opportunity, which I was really pleased to receive, to talk to the heads of corrections who were all meeting together from the provinces about this particular issue. And many of them are sitting at the tables in the province where the federal money for housing issues is divvied up, which is really good. So hopefully we'll see some of that being targeted for those people who are being released from prison into homelessness.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and yeah, that's always a bit of an issue. I mean, Canada as a whole, but PEI, particularly, is in the midst of a housing crunch, and so it's difficult for anyone on PEI to find housing right now.
Yeah,
With more demand than supply, landlords can afford to be pretty selective with who they rent to. And when you talk about people being released from custody, aside from kind of the anchor of a criminal record, but they often are dealing with a lot of other issues as well, mental health, addiction, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Landlords can kind of afford to turn them down or price them out of renting locations. Right? So, unfortunately, sort of the broader public doesn't always have a great deal of sympathy for the John Howard clientele.
No.
Yeah, and so the resources that are available aren't necessarily made available to our clients. So I'd say hopefully through advocacy work that you're doing at the national level, and that all the provinces and territories do, that we can start to kind of change those attitudes and start to free up a few of those resources for our clients.
I mean, it really would make a broader social contribution, right? It would help communities to be safer. And many of the people being released are struggling with, mental health issues and substance abuse problems and stuff. And they really need support in terms of making that transition successfully. And housing is important, but so too are the supports for the people in the housing, you know?
Yeah, and I think people sort of, like you said, they have that stigma around what they might represent when they're released back into community. But if there is that opportunity for, you know, change and sort of rehabilitation and reintegration, as you might call it, then if they're not, you know, reoffending and going back in, that saves, you know, the system in a variety of ways, which
Absolutely.
helps,
Yeah.
you know, from the community level, right?
Yeah, and like I always say when talking about this issue is that what people need to realize is that with the exception of your Paul Bernardos and your Robert Pictons, everyone that goes into jail eventually gets out and comes back to their community. And I think the community is safer and people will probably breathe a little easier knowing that when these people come out that they have supports there for the issues that led them into criminality in the first place.
Yes.
And to help them resolve those issues, right? And so it's like you say, Catherine, to provide those resources at the front end, it just helps with community safety across the spectrum.
Yeah. And interestingly, when I was chatting with the Atlantic EDs this morning, there was a real concern about the number of people who are being held for long periods in remand and then being released, you know, after they've lost their apartments and their jobs and so on, but without really a criminal record. It may be they're held for until time served, or it may be that the charges against them are dropped, but then their life is really in a bad way at that point, right? So there needs to be something done there to support everybody who's coming out, whether it's federal custody, provincial custody, and the way in which they're coming out too can create different needs.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that speaks, you know, Catherine, and again, I know this is an issue on the national scale, but that just speaks to, I think, the broader need for a reform of the bail system.
Absolutely.
In Canada,
Yeah.
And not the reform that politicians and the public seem to be clamoring for, which goes in the complete wrong direction.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I knew it was bad in terms of the proportion of people in provincial jails, Ontario heading west, but the Atlantic EDs confirmed to me that it's about 70-80% of the people in the provincial jails are there on remand. Right.
Yeah,
That's a problem. That's a really serious problem, I think.
And
What do you think it is, Conor? Do you think it's the speed with which things are being processed through the courts? Is that part of the problem?
That's a part of the problem. But the other and maybe even a bigger part of the problem and is that, you know, people, when we're seeking to release people, we're always looking for a plan, a safe place for people to go.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
you know, maybe a surety to keep an eye on them or something. But a lot of people just don't have that.
Yeah.
You know, like it's hard to release someone, you know, into homelessness, right? Because how can they be monitored on conditions in that kind of situation? So there needs to be a big overhaul in the bail system in terms of what's required for people to get out, in terms of like, you know, if people don't have a place to go. I know some provinces actually have like supervised bail programs.
Yes.
Get released. You know, like, but that needs to be implemented nationwide. There just needs to be a significant reform. But you're also right that, you know, the speed with which things are processed through the courts is a big problem too. Here on PEI, we're pretty quick, but, you know, I know of cases in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia where people are, you know, 12 to 18 months out from court dates. And even if they're either in custody that time, or if they are released, they can be on incredibly strict conditions that are just setting them up to fail for this length of time that it's almost impossible to ask anyone to abide by such strict conditions for.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. In fact, the EDs were suggesting that maybe this is something that we only have two policy resolutions from annual general meetings. One has to do with curbing abusive solitary confinement, and the other has to do with improving the health care of prisoners. But maybe it's time for us to think about a resolution to try and focus on that remand crisis. The EDs were describing it as a crisis, you know?
I'd agree with that. Yeah. And I think that would be great to get some sort of directive from national to speaking on that issue for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I know, Catherine, you've been, spoken to government a lot on this issue, and as I say, unfortunately, I don't know that they share our opinion on the matter. But
I think they recognize that there's a problem, but they think it's too many guys are getting out rather than too few. Yeah.
yeah,
But I think it is something that we should probably tackle.
for sure.
Yeah. No, and I think that's an interesting point about people who do go in with an apartment, prioritizing them in a way to get through this process more quickly, knowing that, especially if they're on social assistance, the window's pretty small, 60, maybe 90 days until they'll stop paying their rent. So how can we fast track or expedite those folks specifically because they could meet those conditions and do have a place to go?
And it's difficult as well in PEI, where we have so much seasonal employment. So many people in the winter months go on EI. But if you're sent to custody, that EI can get cut off pretty quick if you're not able to make your bi-monthly reports or your bi-weekly reports.
Right.
Yeah. It's not good. I think there's a lot that can be done in terms of rethinking that whole remand thing. Some of the John Howards, as I may have mentioned, do offer these bail alternatives and provide bail programming for people rather than incarceration, which is good. But there's no consistent policy anywhere about that kind of thing.
No, and in some jurisdictions, John Howards do it, other organizations do it in other jurisdictions. It would be nice if it was something that John Howard could approach all provinces about, in a sort of a uniform way, to say, if every province offers such a program like John Howard, give us the money and John Howard will run it.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, there must be some real problems because your prisons are getting really quite crowded. At least I noticed that Newfoundland Labrador's prison, well, it's really antiquated and it's got a lot of problems anyway, but it's really crowded at the moment. And I imagine yours is, if I'm hearing you correctly, it's probably more crowded in the winter than it is in the summer. Is that right? Because people are,
I think that probably would have been true before, but I think it's probably just pretty crowded year round now.
Yeah. So there may be lots of reasons for why you want to thin that out.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, even like, I know this has been an issue at the national level, but like, like for staffing issues, like for correctional staff and safety of correctional staff and inmates and all kinds of stuff to keep the ratio a little lower, I think benefits everyone.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, it's certainly something that we should strive to work on, even providing like bail hostels or bail beds or, something like that, if it requires a bit more than them just being released with a bit of supervision, right? So there are better alternatives to these people being in jail.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Like, any kind of sort of structured bail program where, say, if there was a residence that was operated just for people being released on remand, this is where you're going to live.
Yeah.
The staff that work here are going to monitor you. They'll have copies of your conditions, make sure you're abiding by everything. But that could be so beneficial.
Yeah. But John Howard, as you probably know, we have been delivering a service for the Canada Border Service Agency in terms of providing community-based alternatives to detention for immigration purposes. Now, there hasn't been a lot of that in the Atlantic region, but there has been quite a bit in some of the other jurisdictions, particularly Quebec, Ontario, and BC. But given that all of the provincial governments have indicated that they no longer want to have contracts with Canada Border Service Agency that allows people to be detained in their provincial institutions for immigration purposes, there may be a slightly greater demand for community-based alternatives throughout the country, I would think.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that program, Catherine, that's for people who aren't charged with any criminal offense. They're just being detained strictly on immigration issues, like being detained prior to deportation or something.
Prior to deportation, or they don't know who they are, like there's some problem with their identification records or something, they'll hold them for that. Or if they're a flight risk, but generally they're perceived as being a danger to the public. But their idea of danger is is a little bit different than the John Howard idea of risk to the public, which is actually, risk of criminal behavior hurting somebody. This is more like a flight risk, right? That they might take off on you and you lose them.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see what the implications of that are for the other provinces and for CBSA as they move forward.
For sure. As I say, if there was a way to kind of speak to the premiers of every province and say, hey, this is a problem, here's what we can do about it, and we'll do it in a uniform way across the country through agreements with each province, that would be phenomenal.
That'd be great. Yeah, I agree. And we should think about how we can get that moving, but I agree.
Yeah, that's always the difficult part.
Yeah. For some reason they have to see it as a cost savings to them. And it could be because when we're monitoring people in the community, the per diem cost is considerably less than it is apparently for them to be housed in custody. So you should be able to make an economic argument on this as well. Right?
Here's hoping.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's similar to the arguments around hospital or detox facilities or anything like that for substance use and community-based services.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot to be done for sure.
We've been able to have you on here for a good chunk of time here, Catherine. I'm mindful of that. So I wonder if as we move towards the end of our time, is there any other sort of things from the national perspective that you want to share with us?
The only thing that we are really trying to promote at this point throughout Canada is that federal framework to reduce recidivism. We've got 3 objectives in this. One is for, there to be an allocation of funding made to support the policy objectives that the federal government has articulated. And then we would like to encourage provinces to also try and reduce recidivism in some sort of a concerted framework type of way. And we would also really like John Howard societies to be recognized as doing this work and doing this work successfully in the field. So if you want this done, the organization who's got a lot of experience and a lot of success at supporting reintegration is the John Howard Society. So that's something that we're continuing to push because we think it would have benefits throughout the breadth of our organization, and it would result in much better policy for reintegration and support.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and that certainly fits with some of the conversations that you spoke about that we've been having here with different partners and different representatives from correctional organizations and such.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. Anything else you wanted to add for us before we move towards wrapping up here?
No, I just want to thank you very much for the opportunity, and I wish you all the best with your podcasting and everything else you're doing in PEI. It's a great province, and you got a good crew out there.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Catherine. We'll see you in Calgary in October.
Looking forward to it. You take care.
All right, take care.
Okay, bye.
Okay, everyone. Well, thanks again for Catherine for joining us. Thanks again for everyone for tuning in. I think this was a very unique episode, particularly in comparison to some of the other ones we've had. So hopefully everybody enjoyed that, and that helps broaden your perspective and get a greater understanding of sort of what John Howard's doing all across Canada here.
For sure. Yeah, no, we occupy a little bit of a unique role here on PEI. And we do fantastic work, but it's also nice to kind of see how that work fits into the overall work being done by John Howard across Canada.
That's right. Yeah, it sort of outlines how, we're one of many community organizations on PEI contributing to the work here, but we're also one of many John Howards contributing to the work being done at a John Howard national level.
Yeah, so it's always nice to see where what we're doing fits into the bigger picture.
Yeah. And now people hopefully have a better idea of what that bigger picture looks like.
For sure.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. We will be back September 13th there at 11 a.m. is our next episode. Again, a reminder, you can find us on our YouTube channel at John Howard Society of PEI, or our website, johnhowardsocietyofpei.com.
Yeah, and also check us out on Facebook, John Howard Society of PEI. Like our Facebook page, like and subscribe to the YouTube channel, like Josh said. If you have any questions or you're interested at all in the work that John Howard Society is doing, give us a call. And if you're interested in getting involved, volunteering, joining the board, again, please give us a call, reach out, and we'll definitely find a role for you. We're always very happy to hear from the community and to hear from people who want to support and to try and help those people in supporting. Or if you'd like to make a donation to the John Howard Society, again, reach out to us and we can fill you in on that process as well.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned the volunteering. We actually have 2 volunteer postings for, I think, the first time now.
That's right. Yeah, I think we're looking for people for data analysis and policy development.
That's right.
Yeah, so if you've got any interest in those areas, reach out.
Yeah, they are on the Employment Journey website, and I believe they're on our website as well.
Fantastic.
But, you can always shoot us an email. All right. Well, thanks again, Connor. Always nice to chop it up with you.
Absolutely.